This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the AntiSocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have. This week we are joined by Mariah Lynch. She is I guess the best way to put it is she's a English professor and a Bible study leader, and you can find her stuff on YouTube if you want to hear any of her work. I know she's been doing a series on James for the past couple months. How's it going tonight?
Oh, it is going fantastic. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So what have you been doing with your Bible study? I've seen it, but I haven't had much of a chance to dig super far into it yet.
Yeah, so we just actually wrapped up the series on James. So we did a expositional sort of verse by verse going through. And then, like I said, we just finished. So we're in our lull week. Next week, we're starting a study on Titus. And then we're gearing up to do season 2 of The Chosen, which I'm very excited about. So lots of stuff on the docket.
How did you come to James and Titus as your... are these the first ones you've done, or are these just the first ones you put online?
No, so there's actually a previous one that's online. Ruth is online. That's the first one that we started recording and putting online. We started doing Ruth during the pandemic, and so it became, we wanted to make it so that people who weren't able to join in person, or even if they weren't able to join our virtual Zoom, whatever we were doing, that they would have some way to be able to review the material. So at that point, we started recording stuff and putting it on. And then we decided, hey, let's do the thing. So then for James, we decided to go sort of full hog and do the full video. We've been doing Bible studies, though, since like 2019, only 2019.
What's been your approach on that? How do you approach that book?
The book of James?
Yeah, I mean, I've read it. I'm just curious how you're tackling this. You know, if it's line by line, what are you finding in your discussion?
Sure. So we do go by line, but it's thinking about the book as a whole within the context of Scripture as a whole. And it's always dangerous to come to any single verse and to pull it out and say, "Oh, this applies to me." We had several times where we said something like, "Hey, well, you've probably heard this verse in this setting over here, meant to apply over here, but if you look at it in context, what are we thinking about in context? What's James's overall purpose? What's his overall message? What's the historical occasion that he's writing to these believers for?" And just sort of approaching it that way. And so whenever you're looking at it that way, in the context of trials, and he's encouraging them to stay the course and to not fall into sin, but to have faith that has feet and is actually lived out in the real world, then I think a lot of the sections that tend to be trickier become easier whenever you think about it in the context of why he's writing.
Well, what religious background do you come from then? I mean, I know lots of different people who tend to approach the Bible different methodological perspectives, so I'm curious what yours is.
Sure, I would describe myself as just a Christian, so I'm not affiliated with any particular denomination. I go to a Bible church, I went to a Bible college, and I hope that whenever I approach the word that I do it faithfully. I'm sure that I'm missing stuff, and I'm sure that there are some specific denominations that have nailed something down better than I have, and as James 3 says, teachers will be held to a higher account. So someday I'm going to get to heaven and God's going to be like, "So this one over here." I'm like, dang it. But I do strive to just be biblical. And I like I said, I'm sure that I don't score 100, but that's always my goal. It's not coming at it from any particular background.
Well, you're also an academic, so I imagine you're bringing a lot of that into it too, at least to some degree.
Yeah, that's true. I do have probably more of an English bent to it, because I'm noticing a lot more of the grammar stuff, even though I don't speak Greek and Hebrew. Whenever we do the Bible studies, noticing things with how the language is set up, noticing different parallelisms, and in the English, you're like, there's a therefore there, but guess what, guys? In Greek, there's no therefore there, so you can't ask what it's there for. And so noticing different things like that has been exciting and cool. And I think I don't know if it's the English background that makes me look more into that, but I definitely look into that stuff, and I think that having an English background helps with some of the diagrams and connecting things. So there's definitely that.
I was gonna say, if you probably get a lot more out of a King James Bible than your average person going, because you would probably draw a lot more weird connections to it than anything else.
Maybe. King James isn't my favorite just because it is old. No, not just because it's old English. It's old English, which we don't really use these days. So I'm like, just there are plenty of other good versions that speak a language that we commonly understand. So I don't see the need to sort of go into old English, although it's beautiful. So if people like it, go for it. But there's also a couple of different manuscript traditions. Sort of histories of manuscripts, and the King James comes from one, and like the English Standard comes from another one, and I tend to like, now the differences are minor, like they're not major, but I tend to like how the ESV comes across a little bit better. Not always, but I tend to. So I tend not to want to recommend the King James, but it's not a bad version.
I mean, I hold up the King James as the most literary of all the Bibles, if only just because it's the one that holds up the English tradition somewhat. Like I remember I did a list of the five books that most deeply influence the English language, and I put that on there. Not necessarily because I think it's the most academically inclined of the Bibles, but I mean, there's unicorns in that Bible, so it's out there. But you read certain translations, and you just I judge a translation by how it translates the final chapter of Job. Because if it doesn't actually just include the word Leviathan or Behemoth, I know that this person is taking the piss. So I'm like, you're not.
Well,
like yes. I have a highly annotated. Hold on, let me pull it over real quick.
Okay.
A highly annotated New International Version that I was using for years.
I see that.
And then I got to Job. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick.
Yeah, well, the problem with the NIV is that it's a thought for thought. So it's not just a translation, it's an interpretation. So they're trying to guess what they think that the authors meant and put in meaning, which is great sometimes, because sometimes you read it and you're like, what on earth were what? Like, and some words are so vague, and they, especially in Hebrew, they have such a wide range of meaning that sometimes all of the meanings can be intended at once. Like I can't speak Hebrew, but the Hebrew word hebel, which is in Ecclesiastes, like it means futile, it means empty, fleeting, brief, enigmatic, frustrating, all at once. I mean, like that's not very helpful. Thank you, but it is, but it isn't.
Well, here's my favorite line from the New International. Job 41:1. Can you catch a crocodile with a hook or put a noose around its jaw? Annotation, Behemoth. Or annotation, Leviathan. So it's just straight up translating the word incorrectly.
Correct. Yes.
Which, if you've ever watched Inspiring Philosophy, Behemoth and Leviathan are Canaanite chaos demons. So... Or chaos gods. So I'm like, you don't understand anything if you say that. Which I will
have missed the mark.
Which I'll throw this out as an alternative. I've been working my way through Robert Alter very slowly, but he is probably the most interesting one I've read so far. Let me he's not afraid to be brave. He translates Genesis 1 as when God created the heavens and the earth. So he didn't say in the beginning. So he's actually willing to take syntax risks with this. So
nice.
Yeah,
that's cool.
But yeah, I mean, we are nowhere near where we started in this or to our initial plan for this conversation. But I like
that. Is A-okay.
I like talking Bible nerdery. So, but yeah,
I love the Bible. It is my favorite thing to talk about. So anytime we go down that trail, I'm like, excuse me, I'm going to dive in head first and not come back up for air. So I'm with you.
I don't know. There's plenty of Christians who do that, and they come out worse for wear. Not because they're reading the Bible, but because they're doing something incredibly stupid in the way they're approaching it. But that
is true, and that's why you've got to have people around you who can be like, hey, you're going over there, and that's really weird. What are you doing? What
Yeah.
are you doing? And you're like, nothing. They're like, why don't you come back over here? Okay.
Some of them come out Unitarians. Anyway, moving on.
Anyway.
But yeah, we both came into this because we just read this. You read it much faster than I did, but
well, I listened to it first, and then I reread it over the past week. In between in between doing some bouldering at the rock gym. Now, whenever I would be resting, I would be reading another essay. So to refresh my brain.
But
so,
yeah,
it's so good.
I mean, I can't impress enough that this is an excellent edition of Chesterton, probably what needs to be the new standard bearer for approaching Chesterton from a layman perspective, which I'm sure that's going to give its nominal author, Ethan, quite the ego boost, but it needs to be said. Also, I do want to put a lampshade. I don't want to address the B-sized elephant in the room. This has nothing to do with that. You know, we kind of approached this. I mean, the book came out around the same time that everything happened there, so I don't want to address the controversies happening over there just because it's not pertinent to this. But you know,
completely separate. Yep. I love the book, Chesterton's Gateway.
Yes.
Freaking tastic.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Apparently selling really well too. So it's got quite the audience building up around it, which I'm happy to hear that.
Very, very exciting. I'm so glad for Ethan. So very cool.
As a non-denominational Protestant, what is your relationship with Chesterton like?
So I honestly, I got introduced to Chesterton's work through the Babylon Bee. I'm sure I'd heard of him. You know, you hear of all sorts of different theologians in sort of the Bible and religious spheres. And then my brain just deletes information that it doesn't find immediately useful. So I deleted Chesterton until they were talking about him over and over and over again. And I became intrigued. But it was sort of one of those things where I was like, do I have time? It seems really hard. And it's not that I'm not intellectual, but I'm lazy sometimes, you know, and I just don't want to. I don't want to. It's just hard. It's hard to, and then you try to read something and you're like, I don't know what he's saying. I can't. I actually was envious whenever they were talking about those Chesterton reading clubs where they would get together and read Chesterton and talk about it. I was like, I want that. Like, I would love to have something where you can get together and just talk about it, just to try to start to understand what in the world is going on. So you're not just working through 50 pages of material and then going, well, there's that. So I came to Chesterton's Gateway really this was my introduction. This was the gateway to Chesterton's work. So I know he's a Catholic. He still has really great thoughts. I say that like Catholic. So as somebody who believes slightly different things than Catholics do, I affirm that both Protestants and Catholics have really great ideas. And as somebody who believes slightly differently about some things, I think that he has many really deep and clarifying insights, which I really enjoyed, especially with Ethan's helping to explain what those insights were. So
yeah, I mean, I approach Chesterton more or less as a Lewis fan because I am the biggest C.S. Lewis fan I know. I mean, I have basically every single thing he's published, including the really hard to find stuff. So
love it.
I approached Chesterton and I expect it to be a little bit similar to that because they kind of have that same reputation, and it is nothing like Lewis. Like, Lewis is he's a deep thinker, but he's also a very clear thinker. He lays out his arguments very coherently. Chesterton is it's like getting thrown between whirlpools. You are just getting sucked into one thing and then sucked in another, and there's layers to the implications of his thoughts. I mean, he's a Catholic integralist, so you have to unpack that. And there's all these archaic references to late 19th century literature and politics and history, and then those all have to be unpacked. And he's also a deeply learned man, so he'll just casually throw references to Virgil and Dante in his speech and expect that the reader knows enough about it to unpack the the implications of what he's saying.
Right.
So
yeah.
And then the first thing I read of his was Heretics, which not one of his hardest books. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that that's the first one they read, and they say, "Wow, this is a really good book." And then you try to think back on anything that happened in that book, and it's like, "Wow, I don't remember that book at all." It's just like,
right.
It's like, I remember he talked. There's a whole chapter about George Bernard Shaw and Rudyard Kipling, and I'm like,
I mean, exciting stuff.
Yeah, but I haven't read. I think I've read maybe like 3 verses of Kipling in my entire life, so I can't say.
Right.
Like that doesn't echo with any sort of resonance. And then the second one the second and third one I read were Everlasting Man and St. Thomas Aquinas, which I had my own problems with both of those. Everlasting Man I know is generally considered his masterpiece. Very good book, probably the most mature thing he ever wrote. I think I remember about maybe a tenth of it as a book. It is a long book. And then St. Thomas Aquinas, okay history book, but I can't get over the fact that he called Martin Luther a barbarian. Like, I have my own hang-ups with Chesterton just as a Protestant approaching this material. So.
Right. Sure. I mean, granted, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's Chesterton is hard. It is a very hard writer to approach. But I guess part of the point of this book is to make Chesterton accessible, which I don't know if there's any. I don't know if there's ever been someone who's tried that before. I have joined the same kind of Chesterton society as you mentioned. There's one out by me in Nashville, and I found it to be a very, there's a lot of camaraderie to it, but it's also a very bro-ish experience because you get 4 pre-Vatican I tradcaths in a room, get them a couple beers in them, and suddenly they're screaming about sodomy at the top of their lungs in an open cafe. And I'm like, yeah, this is going well. This is going well.
This is great. This is fantastic, guys. I love this. I can't wait for next week.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That makes sense.
We ended up talking that was the chapter we talked about then was interesting. We talked about the falsity of statistics, which was a very good Chesterton essay. And I think Ethan's right when he says that Chesterton is best understood in his essays because it's much more digestible than the books. I mean, the books are good once you understand Chesterton's writing style, but really until you do that, you aren't going to get anything out of his books because you have to kind of approach it with a certain amount of pre-knowledge and some sort of approach in general.
Right. I can't remember which essay he says it in, but Ethan makes a comment about in one of his introductions about the writing style and how it is maybe it was orthodoxy.
I think it was towards the beginning. I could be wrong.
Yeah. Maybe I think it was introductory remarks on the importance of orthodoxy. Maybe it doesn't matter. And one of them, he talks about how you want Chesterton to lay it out all nice and straight, and so whenever you dive in, you're like, oh, what's going on? Because he doesn't. He just approaches it. He just talks about things sort of as they come up and as it links to the next thing. So instead of a sequence of orderly events, it's I came down this path and then I saw this mushroom, and this mushroom made me think of whenever I was a child. And whenever I was a child, I liked bread, and oh look, there's some bread over there. And it doesn't necessarily wind in one specific path, but it makes sense in Chesterton's brain. And so if you can track that pattern of thought, then you're going to be okay. But if you come to it expecting that it's going to be a systematic theology, then you're going to be disappointed. But as long as you know that that's not what you're getting, then it's going to be easier. So I appreciated that, because expectations are everything. As long as you're expecting what you're getting, it's at least kind of manageable.
There's almost something very childlike at the way you describe it, in a good way. Like there's like the innocent way a child tells a story where they feel like, I went to a place and then I met a person and that person said this and we went to another place, and like there. I mean, I guess that's kind of the charm of it, that there is a simplicity under the arguments, and that the subtext is that when the whole thing clicks, it does fit in a very simple way, but it takes a very long time to get to that place where it works.
Yeah.
Was there any essay in particular where that happened for you, where it just kind of all came together?
Oh, I don't know if there was anyone where it was like sort of getting pulled along, and then I was like, and then I was like, oh, okay. I think the general gists were either I could track, like from the beginning, and I was like, okay, all right, yeah, okay, this resonates. Or I was like, I think I can sort of understand the concept behind what he's driving at, but I have no idea what words he's saying. And it was still like even with the annotations where it was just complex enough that I was like, I got this. Like, I understand, I think, but it doesn't, like you were saying earlier, it doesn't really resonate deeply. There were a lot that I was like, oh my gosh, I love Chesterton now. This is fantastic. I can't believe this. One that they're so I'm like, but this so for example, the one on cheese was just great because first of all, he's talking about cheese, and I love cheese. Cheese is just amazing. How can you go wrong with cheese unless you're lactose intolerant, in which case you should repent and eat cheese because cheese is amazing. But it makes a point. It makes a really good, solid, understandable point that whenever you go big and you commercialize and you have all of the industry, you lose the personalization of the individual cheeses, and you can extrapolate that point and apply it to sort of the general context of everything else. Whenever you go big, you lose that closeness and that individuality. Instead of going to the restaurant, you have the generic cheese that anybody can get. And so just pointing out the importance of the little things and going small. And that's something that I think came up several times. He reminded me a little bit of Tolkien, actually, at the end of Lord of the Rings, how Tolkien goes back, and the end of the book is Sam coming home, and he sits down at his table, he's with Rose, and Eleanor's on his lap, and he says, well, I'm back. And it's that emphasis on the sort of ordinariness of life, but that the ordinariness of life is good. It's not something that's to be despised or ignored just because it's ordinary or regular, but it's to be especially treasured because it's ordinary, like in Tremendous Trifles. That was the whole point of that intro, that it's you have to have a sense of wonder about life. Then in one of the other ones. This is the problem. I made notes in the pages cleverly, but then I didn't
Was it a piece of chalk?
mark any of the pages. So I should have had I should have had 16 pieces of chalk. I was at the rock gym, so I should have. Oh, this is what it was. So the part where he talks about God telling the sun to rise every morning, what if God looks on the sun rising every morning and says with joy, do it again, and I love that, because it's so true that we forget the wonder in the ordinary things, and Chesterton just really brings that to light, that the ordinary things are wonderful if only we have eyes to see it, if only we'll slow down and see that life is beautiful and that life is a gift from God. So I love that. I love Chesterton's sort of recurring emphasis on that. It was pretty cool.
I liked Ethan's comment that Kraft American cheese would probably drive Chesterton mad.
I cannot agree more. Kraft is disgusting. I don't even I won't even eat American. If something is served with American cheese, I will say no, thank you. I will have it without your plastic. Thank you.
I mean, I would normally say that Kraft is good for grilled cheese sandwiches, but you haven't lived until you made that gratuitously over the top grilled cheese sandwich from Chef with Jon Favreau, where he has 18 different cheeses and it gives you a heart attack when you eat it. But
that sounds exciting. In maybe not a good way, but maybe a good way. The heart attack part makes me doubt, but I mean, food is good.
If you've ever seen it, Jon Favreau's Chef is a very good movie, and it's very good food porn movie. Makes you want to eat food, but mean,
I don't watch much stuff.
if you watch one movie, watch
not,
that. Buy like a sandwich from Subway and watch that movie, and you will just die. You'll know it.
Well, Subway's gross. So.
Well, then buy a really good sandwich, and then just watch that movie, and just you'll die. But
and then okay, all right, fair enough.
Anyway, so I found the general structure of the book kind of useful in that it's like you said, the first chapter, the Tremendous Trifles, is a really good chapter for kind of giving you the idea of how Chesterton thinks, but it's also a really short chapter. It's like 4 pages. There's nothing
very
to
digestible.
It. Yeah, and I like the idea of the child who decides to grow to the size of a mountain, and a child that decides to grow to the size of a thimble, and exploring how those two people, their worldviews are changed by the experience of changing size, where the giant gets bored with everything and then is killed, but then the tiny man he's left in one valley, and he never lacks wonder, because there's always something new around every single foot, and there's never lack of wonder. Although I was a little confused why he named them Peter and Paul. I'm like, is that supposed to be some sort of a weird reference to the apostles? I'm not sure I'm not sure I get the subtext of that, but
I'm not sure either. I have to say I didn't think twice about it. I was like, Peter Paul, sure, why not?
He's Catholic, I guess, but he's Catholic, so I also assume that means that there's a second meaning to that. But he likes his darkly hidden jokes.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I thought it was really interesting, because it's that analogy, or I guess metaphor, of the person who is prideful and who's sort of puffed up with their own sense of self-importance and what they know, can go around life and similarly never be impressed, never be able to take joy in anything, because they're all that in a bag of chips, and they can't be satisfied by anything anymore, because they've experienced so much and they've had so much, and they think they deserve so much that nothing satisfies. Whereas somebody of a humble spirit who's just like, oh, I got to have a cup of coffee, and it was the best cup of coffee I have ever had, and I'm just so jazzed about this coffee. Something that may or may not be resonating with my past self that happened like 5 hours ago, but it's fine. I like coffee. Coffee's great.
I'm on coffee now, and it's the best coffee I've had today, and it's because it's got at least 3 shots of Irish cream in it at the moment. So
there you go. I was gonna say, don't get addicted to caffeine though, kids. That's a dicey. To
be fair, it's decaf, so
socially acceptable drug.
I don't like
it's that.
I don't like mixing caffeine and alcohol, so don't do that, kids. It's bad for your heart.
Don't do any drugs, guys. Anyway, but that the importance of humility and the importance of, I think, gratitude and being willing to. So even the smallest things that seem like they're so small and that we could take them for granted, we shouldn't take them for granted, because they are all gifts, and we're not guaranteed any of them. And so, like the person who has been physically shrunk to so small that even a blade of grass becomes marvelous, whenever you have that humble stature of your heart, and then you can look at even a pair of socks and be like, wow, a pair of socks, that's great, because not everybody has a pair of socks. So that humility and gratefulness can bring the wonder back into life.
That's something Ethan talks about in the towards the end of the book, when he talks about when he does his recommendations chapter, where he says, "What book should you read of Chesterton's?" And he said, "Oh, you should read Chesterton's biography." And Ethan says, "Don't do that. Chesterton didn't like talking about himself. The biography is literally about everything except himself," which that's a funny concept. I'd be curious to page through it just to see what purpose that served, but
yeah, what he recommends. It's his list of recommendations.
Yeah,
I really like this one. I haven't read it, so I don't know.
Which one? Or the autobiography?
Yeah, I have not read anything else of Chesterton's. Just this.
Okay.
Twice. So.
I was gonna say you're committed, but yeah, the book kind of like I said, the first couple chapters are very digestible. About the time I think he gets to like the Maniac and some of the longer chapters, it started skidding a little bit for me, because that's when Chesterton, where Ethan starts throwing in the really dense chapters, and a lot of these are just straight up full chapters from Orthodoxy and Heretics, and I think one or two others. I'm not remembering all of them, but I mean they're good, but they didn't work the first time I read it. I mean, or at least initially. I mean, I remember I hit The Ethics of Elfland, which I'd been wanting to read because I'd heard that title so many times before, and my brain was literally just like, the train wheels are moving on the track, but the train's not going anywhere. It's just, wheels are spinning, and I didn't get the whole chapter. And then I read the next one, Paradox to Christianity, and it all just clicked perfectly. I'm like, oh my gosh, I see it. I see the design. It's perfect. Like, that was the moment for me when this book just came to my own, and from that point on, I just like consumed it in like 3 days. Like, as I'm a very slow reader, but at that point, I'm like, okay, I get it now. I get it.
Right.
And some of those last chapters are very good towards the beginning or towards the end. Like, I am an absolute sucker for anything Job related, so I love that chapter.
I love that chapter. I think it made me cry. The book made me cry a couple of times. Aww. The section on God making the sun rise over and over again with joy. I was like, oh, because that captures the heart of God in a way that I think we don't oftentimes think about him, that he is a God of joy, and that he does rejoice in beauty, and it's beautiful. But yes, the one on Job, fantastic. I'm turning to the part where I'm like, I've underlined different things.
I did discover the only spelling mistake in this book was on page 149. So.
What was it?
They misspell spiritual in the third sentence from the bottom.
Oh snap! Ethan Nicole, time to take it back. Time to take it back. You gotta get rid of it. Start over. Oh yeah, supernal. Spiritual. Well, maybe it was I don't know. I'm not the copy editor. Not my job. Pay me more, and I'll take another look. Unless it's a text message, then I don't. I'm like, I'm not reading and judging anything. But text messages. Come on, yo.
No one can pay me any amount of money to be a copy editor. I am not. I am not attentive enough for that. I can barely spell normally, let alone when I'm being paid, when I'm checking someone else's work.
Right. I think that whenever you're doing your own stuff, sometimes it's the hardest to catch because you're so in tune with what you're trying to communicate that you just don't see it, because you're just like, this is my thought. I know what I said.
The world shouldn't question my brilliance.
What were you trying to say here? I was like, is it not perfectly obvious? And they go, no. I'm like, okay. I don't know how to fix it, because in my mind, I'm perfectly clear and a perfect genius.
I don't care how many times I misspelled the word "it's." The rest of it's perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah,
coming back to Job. Yeah, go ahead.
I love the way he talks about Job essentially as kind of not an antithesis, but a kind of resolution to everything else that's happening inside the Old Testament. He's very harsh. Like, at one point he describes like every character in the Old Testament except for God essentially as automaton, like, barely sentient, barely functional, just, doing the same thing over and over again, basically NPC level thought. Like, it's not like there's something very weird about that. I'm not exactly sure what like that background is, because I don't think I don't know what the traditional thought on the religious state of the ancient Jews is supposed to be within Christian thought. Like, is the Catholic view supposed to be that they're semi-damned if they don't have Christ, or I'm not sure exactly what the thought is. I mean, like, if you think that they're this bad, like, what is the implication?
Yeah, I think that and I'm not sure, no idea, but what he might be pointing to could be answered in sort of, so on the last page he's talking about the Jews again and how the book of Job sort of saves the Jews, and on page 157 he says, for once people have begun to believe that prosperity is the reward of virtue, their next calamity is obvious. If prosperity is regarded as the reward of virtue, it will be regarded as the symptom of virtue. And thinking about, so the mindset of all of the friends in Job is that sort of retribution theology where, okay, if I do something good, then God has to pay me back good. And if I do something bad, then okay, God will pay me back bad. So if something bad happens to me, it's because I did something wrong. But it's too simplistic, and it doesn't take into consideration the bigger picture of who God is and what God's doing in the world. And that's just what Chesterton says on page 155. Instead of proving to Job that it's an explicable world, he insists that it is a much stranger world than Job ever thought it was. And so what many Old Testament characters were going off of was that sort of, I guess, that retribution theology, the Mosaic covenant. Okay, if I follow God, then he will bless me. And certainly God, of course, promises those material blessings through the Mosaic covenant and says, hey, obey me and you'll be blessed. But that's not an overarching guarantee. And so I think the book of Job helps break out of that mold. Whereas, again, the Jewish people may have been tempted to stick within that mold and to sort of, and that's sort of where I think that the idea of automaton may be coming into play. Again, am I a Chesterton scholar? Do I know Catholic background? Very, very thoroughly no. So I could be completely wrong. He could have been thinking about something completely different. But that's what I thought of whenever you said that.
I recall at the very last page of the book, Ethan brings up the much touted accusation from the Neckbeard Society that Chesterton is anti-Semitic, which I don't necessarily think that's the case here. I think that there are some Catholics that do tend to skew a little bit far into being too hard on the Jews for the wrong reasons, and I don't know if Chesterton necessarily skews into that at all. But I'd have to look into that claim to see what he's actually going for. But
right,
I don't know this. Like I think he's probably right that Job is the most humanizing of all the books in the Old Testament because it is the one that most feels real. And it's reading that quote you brought up, my first thought was, why hasn't Joel Osteen read this? Why haven't the prosperity gospel people read this? Your entire career is a fraud.
Yes, reading the Bible is dangerous to Joel Osteen and those of his ilk. But because if you read, especially, if you read the older New Testament at all, if you read the book of Job, if you read anything that Jesus says to his followers, if you read the different letters that are written by the different disciples, you see very quickly that we're not promised a good time here on earth. We're promised trouble, tribulation, persecution, hatred. Those aren't the promises that we as Christians like to claim because, well, frankly, I like to be comfortable. But that's what God says, that if you follow me, if you love me, if you seek to do my will, you will be persecuted. And that's not cool exactly, it's not fun, but yeah, I don't think that Joel Osteen has read those parts of scripture, or has at least cut them out and burned them a long time ago.
His Bible's probably more cut up than Thomas Jefferson's, but
probably.
I have to leave for Bible study in about 15 minutes, but I think that we can fit at least one more topic into this. I think it might be interesting to at least address the political side of his philosophy, because I think a lot of the reason why people go back to Chesterton now is because he is such a counterfactual writer philosophically from where we are right now. He's often known as the Saint of Sanity. He's famous for his very sane, sensible opinions, very, British and stiff upper lip and common sense and uncomplicated. And he talks about that a little bit in Paradox of Christianity, where, the weird thing about Christianity is you can have an ideology where one person says it's too strict, another person says it's not strict enough, or another person says
Mm-hmm.
it's too misogynistic, or it's not
Right.
misogynistic enough, or we're at every level of, Christian discourse, the criticism seems to be that it's both too much and not enough, which Chesterton takes to believe that literally everyone else is wrong, which is
well, I think that, yeah, but I think that he has a valid point, because if there's something genuinely wrong with something, then you can point to it and everybody can sort of be like, okay, well, yeah, this person yells too much. Yeah, probably. But if what it feels like is people are looking for something to attack. And so they're like, well, I don't like this. And so they're an extreme on one side. And so, well, I don't like this, and the extreme on the other side. But if there's nothing actually substantive for you to be able to say, okay, well, how can it both be too far in one direction, but also too far in the other direction? It's not possible. And so if it's not possible, then there's something wrong with the beholder. And if there are so many contradictions, so many, as he says, paradoxes, then perhaps there's something in the middle that's true. Which I was like, that is a very hard point to explain, but that's like my soul resonated with. But I was like, I don't know if I could explain to somebody like that. That's just weird to explain. But I was like, yeah. But I don't know where you were going to go off of that too.
I mean, there's a couple directions I could launch into. I mean, my first instinct is to kind of talk about the misuse of Chesterton, generally speaking, because like I said, when I went to the Chesterton Club, you get a bunch of really rowdy tradcath guys running around screaming about sodomy in public, which kind of goes back to your point about thinking you're virtuous and therefore acting like you deserve something, which I think is one of the great sins of most modern Christians is, I am a virtuous Christian, therefore I can be an absolute a-hole to everyone, because I'm right. And I can sit around and call every single person gay, and you're wrong, and you're upset, and you're a blasphemer, and I don't want to say anyone specifically, but I see this all the time, where the thought that you are virtuous ends up superseding the fact that you don't act virtuous, that you don't act with any sort of compassion or love. You're not disciplining someone for acting wrong. You're saying, I am right, you are wrong. And effectively, you're not living out the actual lesson. You're just taking pride in your rightness, which is so common for Christians nowadays. Which Chesterton himself would probably have a problem with. Like, I'm sure there are Chesterton fans that Chesterton wouldn't like for that reason.
Probably, yeah. I'm sure anybody who rises to renown in any sense would probably look down at some of their followers later on and be like, oh my gosh, please stop talking about me. Don't let me be affiliated with you.
Yeah, like imagine if Chesterton met like some twerp like Nick Fuentes, and just like, he was like, I believe exactly what you do, and he's like, hardly. I mean, it's like,
right. Yeah, so you're like, not exactly.
People think I'm an anti-Semite, but you're just you. It's like,
yeah,
good Lord.
Yeah.
But I mean, but Chesterton's also very kind of renowned for his, I guess, his straight up anti-capitalism, which is not a common sentiment on the right, generally speaking. But it's his is more sensitive than I think than most. What do you react to any of his sentiments about money at all, or?
I mean, I think that, so I'm in favor of capitalism, generally speaking, but I think that there's always wisdom in being able to temper one's support of something. So to be able to say, yeah, I think that capitalism is a good thing, but when does it get out of control? And how, is it good in every single scenario, or are there times whenever, greed is the motivator and it's overtaking the good of the people who it's trying to serve or of its employees? And, how far are we willing to support the sort of general idea of capitalism? So I haven't looked into a ton of his specific critiques, so I can't say, oh yeah, I like this specific critique. But I would say, generally speaking, that I think that it can be wise to be able to say, oh, well, maybe not whole hog. Only go whole hog for Jesus. Everything else, a little bit of temperance.
I know that he described himself as a distributist, meaning he essentially was pro free markets, but only on the local level. So I think he essentially wanted to live in a relatively theocratic top-down government, but where all markets are localized and where everything is essential at the level of the individual is free, but everything above that is more controlled and more designed essentially to create the kind of virtuous market from a top-down perspective. There's a book I got when I went to the Chesterton Society called The Hound of Distributism, which I'm going to read soon. Which I want to go into it more and be able to articulate what this idea is fully. But I know a lot of people that consider distributism to essentially just be right-wing socialism. So it might very well be, because the tradcasts tend to skew a little bit authoritarian in their sensibilities. So I wouldn't be surprised if I came out of it completely, not interested in it. But generally speaking, I think you are right in that. And when I talked to the person about last month, we basically came to the same conclusion, where the problem with capitalism is that it's too good at giving people exactly what they want, and it turns out people just want junk and pornography. That's all they want. They don't want they don't want to be a good person. They don't want to try hard. They just want to live in a pod and eat the bugs, as the kids say nowadays. But so I think that that Chesterton is ultimately onto something, but I'm curious if it can be too easily disabused by the more radical among us. So like I said, it comes down to what you're using this for yourself or for whatever radical ideology you're trying to push.
For sure. Yeah, and I think that we want to be able to put a system in place that will, we being people generally, that will enable people to live righteously and to treat each other well. But it doesn't matter what system is in place. People's hearts are broken, and people's hearts are sinful. And so we're always going to find people who are going to abuse each other, people who are going to take advantage of the system, whatever the system happens to be. I think that generally capitalism is probably the best at sort of holding that at bay rather than some sort of distribution thing. But ultimately, in the Christian worldview, that it is going to come down to a day where all of our earthly, worldly systems of how we trade and operate aren't going to matter anymore, because Christ is going to be at the center, and all wrongs and all evils will be done away with. And so that's the ultimate hope we have. And while we certainly want things to be as just as possible here on earth, we're not going to get there. So I think there's a little bit of, it would be so nice if we could have this perfect society where everything's distributed really well, but it's not going to happen. So hope and dream and care for the poor, but the poor we will always have among us. So
yeah, and I like how Ethan ends it on the essay where he says, all things are good, all things start out as good. What's right with the world is the world, and what's wrong with it is everything else.
Everything else, that's right.
Or as Chesterton would say, what's wrong with the world? I am. So
yes.
But yeah, do you have any other thoughts you want to close on, or?
I love this book. Everybody should get it and read it and or listen to it. I found listening to it to be amazing. Interestingly, Ethan reads the book more smoothly than he does his commentary. So he's like more familiar with the actual works of Chesterton than he is in the commentary he wrote for the Book of Chesterton, which I just found amusing. I just loved hearing Ethan talk about it. It was like having him sort of sit on our front porch and read it to us. So I was like, I just love this. So everybody should go get it, read it, listen to it.
All right. Do you want to shout out your social media and where people can find your Bible studies?
That would be a good thing if I knew any of my social media stuff. But do I?
Oops.
But I don't know anything about myself. My name is Mariah Lynch. If you search me and Berean Bible Church on YouTube. You should be able to find me there. I'm Mariah Lynch on Twitter. Yeah, I don't say anything interesting on Twitter, but you can get the link to the YouTube there.
She's so humble. She doesn't even remember her own name.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm out there.
Just text me a link to it, and I'll throw it in the link dump. So
I'll send you a link. The videos are long. Fair warning.
It's like a podcast. You know, listen to it while you're doing something that requires thought. So, but yeah, it's good to have you on. I remember we saw each other at the Ryman when Daily Wire did their thing, but it's good to talk again. So
Daily Wire, super fun every time. Everybody should also go and see Daily Wire or Backstage Live next time they go do it.
Nostalgic memories from 4 months ago, but yeah.
Absolutely.
But yeah, good talking with you again. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel, artwork by Crystal Cowley, and original music was composed by Melissa Lafira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.